Okay, so like I said, we'll assume that Excel is more like a book, and as a book, we have different pages, which we'll be referring to them as worksheets. And then from worksheet, you also have tabs. And with the tab, you can either use the default tabs that comes with Excel, but you also have a chance to add other tabs that that you want to use. So for instance, I want you to confirm if you have developer tab on your side.
No.
Perfect. So we'll stop there. So what is developer tab? Because that's one of the tabs that I have. So in today's class, I'll be teaching you something called macros. And with macros, this is where we will be able to automate your work. Let me put it into context. Assuming you have a certain work that you do over and over again. So it's more like a routine. And of course, I'm trying to encourage laziness here, which means is instead of doing that job over and over again every time your data comes in, there's a way you can be able to automate your work. And now every time your data changes, you can just execute that macros, and now you've saved yourself a lot of hours that maybe you would have maybe do all the functions and formulas that you normally do. So how do we have developer tab? If I want you to go to file so that you activate or you have developer tab on your side. So just go to file and then options, file, and then option. You can customize your ribbon. Customize your ribbon. And if you look on the right side, so we have the main tab, you should have a chance to either check or uncheck the developer.
Got it.
So like I said, developer, we will interact with it today, and it will really help us in terms of coming up with like automating your work using now what we refer as macros. So I'm still emphasizing on how we use the tabs. And apart from now customizing your ribbon, you will also notice that there are some other functions that might not be there in your Excel. And it's good that you mentioned that what you do with the Excel is more or less what you also do with SPSS. And this is where I'm going. For instance, today, if I tell you to do regression in Excel, I'm not so sure if you're in a position to do that, but you will need to activate some of what we refer as add-ins. So add-ins are more like extension. If I'm moving fast, you let me know. So add-ins are more like extension, and we can see that. So if you go to if you go to your tab, I feel like I'm all over the place. Let me relax a bit. So what am I saying? So I'm saying here is assuming you're told to do some statistical analysis. And to perform statistical analysis, there's also some extension that you can add in your Excel to enable you to perform such kind of task. And I think that's why we even refer this class as Advanced Excel. So Advanced Excel is not actually a new thing. It's not like you're having an Excel which is advanced, but it's all about what can you do with your Excel. So apart from the basic things that people normally do, now these things like now the use of macros, the use of statistical concept, and now what we referred as Advanced Excel. So let's talk about this statistical concept that you can be able to do also with your Excel. So if you go to your tab data, so there's a tab data. go to your tab data, and I want you to confirm if you have what we call analysis toolkit. So if you look at my Excel, on the right side, there's this data analysis part. Kindly confirm if you have the same on your side.
Yes, I have data analyze. It's not data, it's just data analyze. Analyze
Okay.
data.
Okay, let's just do it because I'm not so sure that the Excel, which version of Excel are you using?
I don't know. Well, how will I know?
Okay, so just go to your search icon, and then if you write Excel, so if you see from my end, I'm using Excel 2013. So I don't know if you're using 2016 or 2019.
It just says Excel. Doesn't say anything.
Okay, so no pressure. So the reason why I was asking you is there's a lot of development that Microsoft are also doing with their products. So even I think the latest version of Excel, if for those who are in corporate, I know we have the Microsoft 365, which has a lot of new stuff. Okay.
That's
But
what I'm using.
oh, nice. So
365.
nice. So I think you're way ahead with the tool that you're having, because even the last time I checked, there was that introduction of even artificial intelligence in the latest versions of Excel. So what I'm saying is, in maybe 3 to 4 years' time, some of the things that I'm telling you right now, you will not even need to really have like you don't need to go through the trouble, because now once you'll have artificial intelligence in the new versions of Excel, then also some things like data analysis, I think you can just instruct your AI to do it for you. But that's not you being on the safe side. I always tell my students, even though these AI are coming in, or even the technology is advancing maybe faster than humans, stick to it's more like having an automatic car and also having the ability to drive a manual car. It doesn't harm anyone. So things like data analysis, it's also good, you also have a good background, especially the statistic part of it. And then now you'll be able to prompt or to ask even these AI when they will be there to give you what you need, because you're the master here. You're the one to instruct the software on what you want to achieve. And I think that's why I mentioned that in this class, I'll be focusing more on the logic side. Because if you are not really thinking in a logical way, how will you interact with the computer? So let's talk about this data analysis. So how do you have this data analysis in place? Again, if you go to the option file and then options, the same procedure we did with the developer tab, just go to file and then options. This time we're not customizing ribbon, but now there's the part of add-ins. And I said add-ins are more like just extensions. So it will just enhance your software to do other things that are not basic. So you have several options. You can click on analysis toolpack if you can see it on your side. But if you don't have, then I think I will also wish to interact with the analysis that you're having. So once you click on the analysis toolpack, you'll have an option of go, and then you can select now all the options that are here. So analysis toolpack, you also have analysis toolpack for VBA. You also have Euro currency tools, and then also solver add-in. So just to put you up to speed, there are a lot of guys who do different things. Like for instance, if somebody wants to maybe do those, what do you call it, forex analysis or uh, market analysis, there's a lot of stuff that you can also do now with Excel. So I want you to check almost all the options that you see. And once you click OK, now you will have something called data analysis add-in. So again, the beauty of Excel is every icon that you have, there's a brief description of what it do. And how do you know that? If you take your cursor to any icon and don't click on it, just point at that option, you realize there's a brief description that will be displayed telling you what that icon is supposed to do. For instance, if you take your cursor to that data analysis, you can see that I'm told that analysis tools for financial and scientific data analysis. And when I say scientific, this is where we can talk now about the statistical concept. If I click on it, you will see that now I have all the statistical concept that you can do. So for instance, if I want to do descriptive analysis, I just come here, I'll be able to do descriptive analysis. If I want to draw histogram, I want to do regression, I want to do like almost everything we covered in SPSS. If you activate this thing called data analysis, then you have a chance to do those statistics. I'm not so sure if again I'll be able to do statistics using Excel, because I know if I ask you today what is independent sample t-test, I'm sure we can have that conversation. So what am I intending to do today? I'll be taking you through different case studies. And like I said, the role here is I'm just trying to play around with your ability to relate with logic. Okay, so we will move from one case study to another. Now, today I want us to assume wewe ni mwalimu. And if you are a teacher in let's say high school, of course, there are some variables that you're interacting with. So one, as a teacher, maybe you will have a variable like you assign index number to your students. Two, you will need to give them maybe a test at the end of that term, and then you want to come up with a summary report on performance. So of course, some of the common things that you will do is maybe compare performance between male students and female students based on several subjects. I think that is straightforward. So let's develop a database, or let's come up with some sort of data that now we can use to come up with such a report. So like I said, worksheets are more like pages. So let's work with page one, that is sheet one. So in sheet one, let's say I have index that means I'm interested in identifying my student, and I can identify student by assigning them some index number. Apart from having index number, I think I need to know the name of that student. Apart from name, I would want to know gender of the student. And I will also want to now give them a test. So I'll work under the assumption that the first test that they do is maybe maths. Maybe the second is English. I can have Kiswahili. So you can also develop the same. So whatever I'm doing here, you also do on your side so that we move together. So the idea here is we're coming up with 5 subjects. So math, English, Kiswahili. What else do they do? I think science. And then social studies. So if these are the subjects that your students are doing, then at the end of that term, your job is you would want to know what is the total marks of a student. Apart from the total marks, I think you would also want to know what is the average, because the average is now what will tell you the performance of the student. Remember, I said at some point, our goal is to come up with a summary report which will inform us on maybe comparison in terms of the gender performance, which is males and females. So this is the average score of a student, or sometimes we refer to them as mean score. Apart from average, I would want to assign them grade. So we tell, is that student an A student, a B student, or even E student. Apart from assigning them grade, we'll also want to come up with some sort of remarks. And with remarks, we will say, is that student going to be promoted, or that student is going to repeat that class? And remarks will be subject to their average score, whereby we'll now come with condition. Okay. So, of course, I'm sure I'm sure you have heard about conditional statements. And I think that's all about computers. Computers is all about what should happen if this is the case. And I think now, if you even go and define logic, like what is logic? I think logic is something that makes sense. And if something makes sense, then of course there are two outcomes out of it. It's either there's a situation whereby the event is true, or the event is false. And maybe let me put it into context. When you talk about logic, like I said, it's all about false and true. And that's how computers see things. So if you put it into context in terms of remarks, maybe at some point we will say, if a student had an average that is less than 40, then if that is true, then that student should repeat that class. If that student is not repeating that class, then that means that event is false. Then it means that student should be promoted. So that's the idea behind what we're trying to develop here. But now let's go step by step. Now, in terms of index number, I want to introduce two things. We have what we call autofilling, and we also have what we call highlighting. So these are some of the common skills that you'll find yourself doing over and over again. You will either be autofilling or you will be highlighting your data. So what does it mean? Now, let me come up with some index numbers. So assuming the first index is 1, and then the second index is 2. So Excel has the ability to recognize what we refer as sequence. So sequence is more like a pattern. In this case, I want to maybe have index number from 1 all the way to 10. So you can tell that there's a sequence there, that 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10. So if I go back, before I introduce highlight and autofilling, if I come to this number, so I've just written there 1. So that means there's no sequence, because it doesn't know what should be the next number. So if I drag down this number, you realize that number 1 will be repeated. Okay. Why? Because there's no specific sequence that Excel can follow. Let me go back. If I had 1 and then 2, you realize that there's a sequence here. So if I want this sequence to be repeated, then I need to do what we call highlighting. But before we talk about highlighting, sorry, I think that was an autofill. Like you're filling. To autofill is to tell the software, repeat this sequence to fill the rest of the cell. So when I talk about cell, I mean these boxes. So every box that we are keying in our data is what we refer as a cell. So I want Excel to repeat the sequence all the way to index number 10. So how will I go about such a case? So in this thing, I'll have to highlight both of the cells that I've already entered. And to highlight, pay attention to my cursor. Okay, I hope you can see better. So if you look at my cursor at the moment, it's a bit big. I don't know, like you can tell the way it is, because you'll be able to differentiate when I'm highlighting and also when I'm autofilling. So at the moment, this is how you can highlight. So take your cursor at the middle of that cell and then drag down. You realize you have highlighted both index 1 and index 2. And the idea here is you want that sequence to be populated for the rest of the cell until we achieve index number 10, because we want to have just 10 students in our class. So what do? We need to autofill. So to highlight, like I said, your cursor should be like what you're seeing at the moment, and then drag down to select both of the cells that you're having. That is what we call highlighting. Now to autofill, you will take your cursor to the bottom right corner, where you're seeing my cursor is at the moment, And now you can tell by the color. If you look at the color, it's dark and small. Okay, so that means you are now in a position to autofill. So to highlight, your cursor will be a bit big. To autofill, your cursor will be small. So your job is simple. Just drag down all the way to index number 10. So of course, we'll go to cell number 11. And in terms of sequence, it doesn't only apply with numbers. If you are working with, let's say, days of the week, you have Monday. If you just autofill, you realize Excel has the ability to know that you're dealing with days of the week. So it will follow Monday, Tuesday, all the way to Saturday, and then maybe Sunday and Monday again. So it's up to you to decide when you want to stop. This also applies with the months. So if you're having January as your first month and then you autofill, Excel has the ability to tell the sequence that you're dealing with months of the year. So it will follow through with the months. So January all the way to December, and maybe also again. So I'm sure these things are, you can try them if you have not done it before. But in your work, again, you don't necessarily need to be keying in January, February. You can just autofill, and Excel will be there to help you. And that's the beauty of Excel. Like I said, it's just a tool. And if you have the ability to instruct the tool to do stuff for you, then you realize your work will be really easy. Now, let's come up with some random names, at least for 10 students. So for me, I'll start with George. Okay. So at least try to be gender sensitive when you come up with your name, so that you have both males and female, and that will help us to come up with a summary report later. So in terms of gender, I also want us to keep, so right now we are developing a database. Okay. So again, remember way back before even all this advancement in technology, Excel used to be, not even used to, Excel is more of a way of storing data. Okay. Of course, I know sometimes people say, hey, Excel is not a database. Yes, Excel is not a database. But the idea behind it right now, we are just storing data in Excel. That's why I'm calling it a database. Okay. So for gender, George is a male. And then we have female. And then lastly, I have male. Perfect. So let's talk about subjects. And with subject, I don't want to write all those values manually. Now, this is where I want you to use function. And that is why Excel is a big deal. So Excel comes with a lot of functions. And when I talk about functions, these are just formulas. So we have millions, or I don't know if it's million, but we have thousands of formulas or functions that comes with Excel. That's why I'm not here to teach you all the formulas or all the functions in Excel, but I'll just be giving you scenarios, and then with these scenarios, now you will know, oh, this is the time I need to use aggregate function like sum, or this is the time I need to come up with an average, or this is the time I need to count. So depending with your situation, because you will interact with the many data sets. Okay, and if your logic is up to speed, or if you're really sober in terms of logic, then you'll always figure out your way depending with the data how it comes. So the function that I want to introduce today is a function called random between. And the idea is I don't want us to write numbers manually. So I'm telling Excel, how about you generate some random number for me, And this random number are just the subject that a student can score in a class. Now, let's assume that the highest marks that a student can score in a class, let's give them some benefit of doubt to say like the bright student can maybe score a maximum of, let's say, 99%. And then the weak student can score, let's give them 30. So how about I tell Excel, generate for me some random number which are between 99 and 30. Okay, so I will apply a formula. And how does Excel tell between a formula and just any other element that you're writing? So every time you're using a formula, you have to start with an equal sign. That's how Excel will know, like, oh, whatever this guy is writing is a formula. So I'll write the equal sign, and I've said the first function that you're going to interact with is a function called random between. So I'll just write rand. So as you can see, every time you just key in any function, you realize Excel will give you like a hint. So it provides for you a list of other functions that are in line with what you're writing. That's why I said Excel comes with a lot of functions. Okay, and again, I will not advise anyone to start learning all the functions that are in Excel. No, that's not the best way to understand Excel. So depending with the situation, that's when you tell like, oh, this is the time for me to use random between, or this is the time for me to use count if or whatever. So I will also be guided by the hint. So if you look down here, there's this hint. So if I write there rand, now you can see that I have a function called rand between. That's the function that I'm interested with. Excuse me. And if you point at any item that you are having, like I said, Excel will always give you like a brief description of what that entails. So for instance, with random between, it says what? Random between basically returns a random number between the numbers that you specify. And in this case, we are working under the assumption that the highest score that a student can get in a class is 98. And then the lowest that a student can get in a class, we have just said 30. So this one is just us deciding. So once I select that formula random between, now again, I'm going to be guided by the hint down here. So if you look at the moment, we have bottom, which is now a bit dark in color. So that means expect Excel anticipates that this is the time you need to key in the bottom number, because the formula you're using is called random between. So it wants to know what is the lower limit and then also what will be the top. So 30 will be the lowest marks, and then I will have a comma. So like I said again, pay attention to your hint down here. So 30, comma, and then 90, let's say 99. I will press enter, and a random number has been generated. What number are you getting on your side, if we're in the same page?
85.
Perfect. So the idea here is we will never have the same number, even if we were 300 of us in this class, because these are random numbers that are going to be generated. Okay, so of course we will want to populate this formula to the rest of the students. Okay, so this is where now we're going to do what we call autofilling, and I'm going to teach you two ways of autofilling. So of course we already know the first one, which I said is you take your cursor to the bottom right corner. When the cursor is a bit black, you drag it down. So of course that is the first one. Again, if you don't want that, I'm really encouraging laziness here. All you have to do is just double click on that number. So for instance, if I double click, if I take now the cursor again to that position whereby I can autofill, I don't necessarily need to drag it down. So if I just double click, you realize Excel will know what I'm doing. So yeah, I will be able to get the formula populated to the rest of the students. Again, so we're going to do it downwards. So you can drag it down, and then you can also drag it across. Now to have all the subjects. Tell me what you have noticed so far about the numbers. Are you seeing something with the numbers? What is happening to the numbers? Like, for instance, the first student, you said some figure. Is it the same figure you're still having there?
No, it changes.
Yes, and that's not a
But
good
you
thing.
drag across, the numbers keeps changing.
Yes. So every time you do anything, like for instance, let me come down here because we will be doing some sort of summary. So if I come here and maybe I write count, and then also I do average. So of course we will do comparison for gender, that's male and female. So if you notice, if every time you do anything in your Excel, those figures will keep on changing. Now let's understand what is happening. Because again, like I said, at this time we need to be at the same page with our computer. We need to know what is happening. So what is happening is we have just instructed Excel that generate for us random number. That's why we apply that formula called random between. But we have not instructed again Excel when to stop. That's why I said these computers, they're not really smart. Actually, computer is not smart. That's why even when people are making noise out there like, hey, these computers are going to replace us. No, these things are not smart. It's you who controls it. So we need to tell it now, you need to stop generating random number. Okay. So how do we stop generating random number so that we now say we have achieved our goal, which was we just wanted to have marks for our student. That's it. We don't want any other thing. So how do we solve this? Let me put it in English so that you will know like what is the skill that I'm learning here. You realize even in your job, sometimes you might be sent a data set that comes with formula. Like during generation of that data, they used maybe formula. But maybe you as an analyst, of course, and now I know you're an M&D person. So your job is just to come up with analysis. You don't even necessarily need to know how that data was generated. So how do you stop from using a formula that was used during data entry process so that you just go ahead to your analysis? And that's what we're going to do exactly here, whereby now we're going to say stop implementing that formula called random between. Okay, so to solve that problem, we will have to copy this database, or we'll now have to copy our data and paste it in a new worksheet. But we're not just going to paste it the normal way. Instead, we will paste as values. So we will just tell Excel we're not interested anymore with that formula random between, but instead we just want the values that are there. And I think that you can also apply in other data sets or in other situations that you will encounter yourself. So how do you select your data? There are several ways. Again, it depends with how you want to do it. But for me, let me teach you two ways. So one, you can always control A. So if you go to your shortcut and then you just control and A, of course, you know that is selecting all the items that you're having in your spreadsheet. Again, what if you're not selecting everything? Because I know Excel has, the last time I checked, it has 1 million rows. So if you decide to go all the way down, you will go until 1 million. If you decide to go across, then you'll go up to around, I think 30,000, no, 10,000 columns. That's a lot. So that means you have selected 1 million rows and 10,000 columns. So there's a lot of data that might be somewhere down there that you're not even seeing. So Control A is not always a good way of selecting items in your data. So what is the next one? So let me teach you the one that I use most of the time. But I know there are different ways. People have different ways of selecting data in Excel. So let me just teach you one, and then maybe if you have another one, well and good. So the one that I'm comfortable with you can take your cursor to where you want to start selecting your data. So for instance, I want to start from index. So I'll click on index, and then I want to select maybe up to somewhere here. So I will press the shift button, long press it, don't usiachilie. So long press the shift button, and then go and select the endpoint. So if you want to select maybe up to here, like I said, click once where you want to start, and then shift down, go to the endpoint and click. You realize that area will now be selected. I know I sound very local, but so how do we identify cell so that I don't sound very local? So we will be locating cell based on their column alphabet. I think the columns are in alphabet. You can see it's A, B, C, and then the rows are in numbers. So for instance, if you check on the cell index, that cell is in column A1. So that means column A, row number 1. I think that's a better way for me to sound. So I'll select from cell A1 and then maybe up to M22. You don't necessarily need to do exactly what I've done, but just select that database. What are we doing at the moment? We want to stop from using that formula called random between. So I will copy. You can use the shortcut Control C. In case my video disappears, let me know. I'm prompted that my internet is not that good. But again, copy the database. How will you know you have copied? If you look here, there's a ribbon. So you can see there's some sort of movement across your ribbon. So that means you have copied your data in your clipboard. So what are we going to do next? I want us to open our next page, and we say we will recall pages as worksheet. So I'll open a new worksheet, and then again I'll go to cell A1. So basically I'm just duplicating what I'm doing, but this time I'm only interested with the values. So I will right click. So I'm at cell A1, and then I will right click, and then I'm going to paste in a special way. So go for the option of paste special. You can click on it, or you can even use these icons here, but I'll prefer we click on the paste special part. So right click so that you paste special. And we're going to paste as values. So we're only interested with those values that are there. So I'll click on the option of values. And once I click OK, I have the same data, but this time, this data will not change every time I do anything. So at least I will just be working with that database. So what have we done so far? So we have come up with a class setup. So we have 10 students in this class. And now your job as a teacher is to now come up with total marks of these students, also come up with the average, assign them some grade, come up with some remarks, and also do some comparison between males and females. So let's go back to what I said when I was introducing the class. I said today I'll be teaching you what we call the macros. So if you are a teacher, then it means maybe in your first term, this is what you always do at the end of the term. In your second term, again, the only thing will change is maybe the performance of the student. That means the marks will change, but the nature of your work will be the same. Okay, so what we'll do is we will apply macros so that every term you don't necessarily need to be applying formulas to calculate total marks, average, and grade. So you just do it once and that's it. Every time a new data set will come in, or every time you give out a different test, you just apply that macros. And with macros, you have to be precise, because like I said, you are just recording the process. So in case you do any mistake, you realize that that mistake will now again be applied in all of your work. That's why you really have to have a high level of preciseness. So let's start recording our macros. So go to that tab called Developer. Go to your Developer tab and then record macros. That means we are recording all the processes that we'll be doing. Let's give it a name. We can call it end term review. So remember the rules of creating names, the same way we did in SPSS. We said when you're creating variable names or when you're coming up with names, you cannot have spaces. So you can either have it as one word or you can use an underscore. Underscore, that is shift, what is an underscore? I don't know. Okay, it depends on the keyboard you're using. So, but I'm sure you can be able to figure out how to work with an underscore. So give it a name called end term review. That means you will know that I have an Excel. In your Excel, you know, I have a macros that will be performing end term review. At some point later, we will be doing pivot tables and coming up with charts and so forth. You can also be doing the same. So assuming your job maybe is to come up with you analyze your data by coming up with certain charts. So if your data set, if your variables are the same and only thing that is changing is data set, again, I'm encouraging laziness. Macros will really come in handy. You can just record that process and you have it there with you. So apart from, you also have a chance to come up with a shortcut. So again, if you really don't want even to execute that macros manually, you can even have a shortcut that will be able to execute that. Maybe you can now say, I want control with an M to be the shortcut to be executing a macros called end term review. You can also have another macros, maybe you call it mid. Okay, I don't know what people do in. Okay, maybe people do how many tests in a term. Maybe wanakuwa na ile mid term and then end term. So you can also create several shortcuts to execute different macros that you have. I really hope I'm making sense here. Now, how do we store our macros? So if you come to storage of macros, you can either store a macros in this workbook, and I'll explain what it means. So if you opt for the option of this workbook, then it means the macros that you are creating will only be applied in this workbook. A different workbook, that macros will not work. If you opt for a new workbook, then it means again that macros that you are coming up with at the moment will only work with the new workbook that you will open. I hope that makes sense. But I want us to work with what we call personal macro workbook. And the explanation behind personal macro workbook, it means your macros should be able to work with any workbook. Okay. So regardless whether it's this workbook or a new one that you're going to open or a different one that somebody is going to send to you, your macro should be able to work. So we'll select personal macro workbook. Now, I've already mentioned that you can have as many macros as possible or as you find it fit. So it's always good that you give a brief description of what that macro is will be able to do for you, so that you don't confuse. So sometimes you can be dealing with a very complex type of analysis, and now you have different macros, so you don't even know, was this for end term for 2024? So I'm sure you understand what I mean here. And this one is optional, so you can maybe provide a brief description of what that macros will do for you. So maybe you can say this one is summary report with gender comparison on performance. So that's the spelling of performance. So once you have set up your macros like this, so you have given it a name. Okay, let me just have it a shortcut there. And then of course we're saving our macros in personal macro workbook. And then I've also provided brief description on the same. So how about you just click OK. So from here moving forward, no room for mistakes. And I'll reduce my speed so that any mistake or if you make any error, like I said, it will become part of our macro, which is not a good thing because that thing will now be populated in any analysis that you'll be doing. So let's go step by step. So what is our first job? Our first job is to come up with the total marks for our student. So this one is simple. To come up with total, you do summation here. So summation is a function. Every time you're working with a function, you start with an equal sign. So I'll say equal and then sum. Of course, we know summation is basically to add all the numbers in a range of cells. So I'll select sum. What are these numbers that I want to add? So I will start from maths. So from maths all the way to social studies, we're going to highlight. And I said to highlight, your cursor should be a big. It's not like when you're doing autofilling. So take your cursor at the center of that cell so that you'll have a presentation like what I'm having there. And then drag across to select all the subjects. So you will also notice that now the cell range will also be displayed, whereby we're saying we have selected items from D2 all the way to H2. If I press enter, the marks for George, who's the first student, is 310. So I want to populate the same formula, which is sum of all those subjects to the rest of the students. So I said here there are two ways of going about it. Either you double click or you can drag it down. Now I have marks for all the students. The next one is on average. I want to come up with an average for my student. And again, now this is where you borrow now from statistics. Remember I told you you're the boss here. Don't trust your Excel. Anything you tell Excel, that's what it's going to do. And sometimes it can even give you wrong results. So it's up to you to know that the results I'm getting is actually a reflection of what I'm doing. So we all know what average is. So average is you do a summation, divide by the number of items that are there. So if you come and say average of the total, it will give you a result, but that result will not be the correct one. So I'll say equal sign average. I'm doing average of what? Average of all the subjects, so that Excel will do summation divided by the 5 subjects that these students are doing. I will press enter, and there you go. The average marks for George is around 62. I will populate to get averages for all the students, and there you go. I have my results in place. Of course, I don't want my averages to be having decimal, so I will adjust it. Okay, I think we'll adjust decimal later. Give me some few minutes. I adjust my internet connection, and then we can proceed. I don't know. Can we do? How many minutes do you have? I know we were supposed to stop at 11.
No, I'm okay up to 12. I know it was from
Okay.
10 to 12 according to me.
Let me adjust my internet and then we proceed.
Okay.
Okay, so should be good. So let's do some comparison. Let's compare performance between males and females. So of course, I've already given you a hint that when you're coming up with something like average, you know the idea behind average is you do a summation of every item you have there, divide by the those number of items. Now, when you talk about comparison of performance, you know very well average is now a factor of the denominator. What do I mean here? These are now the challenges that come in with the what do you call them in statistics? I think you call them aggregate function. Let me put it into context. You might do average for males in a class and you get some figure which is maybe very high, but that figure might not be actually a true reflection of the performance because of the denominator. What I mean here is if you have more males in a class than females, then you realize the average for males will tend to be lower than that of females. Why? Because their number are high. Okay, so those are some of the limitation of now even doing mean, the limitation of mean. Okay, and I think in statistics I always tell my student that's where now you come up with something like standard deviation. And if you recall during our SPSS class, I think I told you that standard deviation will inform you in terms of stability of your distribution and also how your distribution look like. Is it skewed to the left or is it skewed to the right? That's the reason why down here, before we even go ahead and compare the average for males and females, first we need to know how many males are in this class. And then again, how many females are in this class. So that every average that we will get, we will know, okay, this one is actually a true reflection or it's biased subject to the denominator. So how do I know the number of males that are in my class? So I will introduce a function. Again, this is where now I think I told you we will be able to interact with different formulas and function in this class subject to our case study. And we're going to go through some sort of a journey so that we learn as many functions as possible. But again, my goal here is not to exhaust all the functions in Excel because there are thousands and thousands of them. So for me to know the number of males in this class, then I will use what we call count, but count with a condition. So the formula we'll use there is count if. Okay. So as usual, if you're using a formula, you have to start with an equal sign. So I'll say equal sign and then count, but I'll select this one which says count if. If you look at the description, it says count if will count the number of cells within a range that meets the given condition. So we're not just counting for everyone. So we say, Excel, how about you count for us students who are male? So the condition here is count male. So if you're not a male, you're not going to be counted. I will double click on count if. And like I said, I'm going to be guided by the hint. So what is the range? Because that's what Excel is anticipating to receive at the moment. So the range basically will mean here is the items that I'm counting. Where is it? Like, is it which column is in that? Okay, let me compose myself here. So what I'm saying here is we have gender. That is where we're going to get male and female. So that becomes our range. And we say range is where you're doing your counting. But in as far as gender is concerned, we are only counting student subject to their criteria. So there's some sort of criteria that a student needs to meet before they are counted. So in this case, under range, I will select all the items in that column gender. And then comma. The next thing the software wants to know is criteria, because the formula that we are using is count if. And every time you see if, it means you're introducing condition. So what is the criteria? Introduce speech marks. Why am I introducing speech marks? Computers understand numbers. So if you tell a computer to differentiate between a male and a female, it doesn't really know what is a male and a female. Okay. So every time you're working with a text, or we call it alphabetic characters, in order for the software to know that you're not dealing with a number, you'll have to introduce speech marks. And then the criteria should mirror exactly what is in your range. So for instance, if the male were in lowercase at the range part, then even when you come and write as a criteria, make sure you write exactly as it is, because it's going to look there. So if it finds a lowercase m, it doesn't know that lowercase m and uppercase m semantic the same. Okay. So I'll press enter, and I'm told I have four males. And then if I do the same for females, the procedure is again equal sign, count if, range is still the same, all the items and the gender, comma, criteria is now female. I press enter. Now I'm told I have 6 female. So of course I will anticipate. So based on these results, now I know that average for males, the chances that it can be higher than those for females. And this one is, we have more females than males in this class. But again, I'm not saying that's always going to be the case. But at least you don't want to be surprised when maybe you walk in a meeting and then somebody questions your findings and they figure out that you are presenting some results that you are not maybe so sure about them. So let's do average. So that we actually say what is the performance of females and also what is the performance of males. So for average, again, we're not going to do average for everyone like the one we did here, but instead we're going to do average with now a condition. So I'm still going to use the aggregate function average, but now I'll use average if. So as usual, equal sign, average, and then average if. Let's digest what is this average if. So here they're saying average ifs will find average. So of course, that's subject to the arithmetic mean. Okay, we're not going into the definition of arithmetic mean, but of course, these are some of the things we did in statistics class. But the idea here is average if will find the average for the cell specified, again, by a given condition or a criteria. So we'll say here, we want average for male, and also later we'll do average for female, which is now the criteria. I will select average if. So what is the range? Still the same. Range is now all the items and the gender, comma, criteria. Who are we interested with? We're interested with the males. Introduce speech marks. I'll have male enclosed in a speech mark, and I've already explained why. And then comma. The software also wants to know the average range. So the idea here is we're doing average of what? So of course, we're doing average of all the subjects. So I will select from math all the way to social studies. And if I press enter, then the average for male stands at around 52. What are you having on your side for males?
Sorry, I was just following.
Okay, perfect. And I think we're also having a recording, so maybe after a session, I will also share with you the recording and then we'll review them. Let's do for females. So the drill is still the same, equal sign, average if, the range is all the items and the gender, comma. What is the criteria? So of course, enclosed in a speech marks, I will have female, and then comma, average range, I said now is the subject or the values that now we are trying to look for average. So I'll start from math all the way to social studies. And if I press enter, now I'm getting 51.8. Okay, I'm getting some really interesting figure. So I don't know if Excel will truncate or it will round off. But anyway, let's now reduce the decimal points. So I will start with the averages. So in average, I want to reduce the decimal point. So let me select all the items on average. And then I'll go to the home tab. And now in your ribbon, so of course, I don't know if I mentioned about ribbon. I think I only introduced tabs. But again, in every tab, we have different items on the ribbon. So when I talk about ribbon, I mean this area here. So if you go to home tab, you see that different items on the ribbon. That means home tab has different functionality. If you go to insert tab, if you check the ribbon again, it has different items. So if I go to the home tab and the numbers in my ribbon, I have the chance of either increasing the decimal point or I can decrease the decimal point. So of course, I want to decrease the decimal point. So I'll do that. I prefer my results to be like that. And then also on averages, I will select them and also decrease the decimal point. So I think Excel, it rounds off. As you can see now, I'm having 52 and 52. I don't know if that's what I was looking for, because I would have preferred it. Let me have it at least in one decimal point so that I can say in terms of performance, males are doing better than females. And this time I'm very confident, because even though males are few in this class, their average is 52. Okay. No, I think I'm confusing myself here. So females are more, that's why their average is low. So I can really say females, I think they're doing better than males, because even if I reduce the decimal point now to not to have any decimal point, I'm seeing they're having more or less the same average, yet females are more than males. So yeah, somebody can really say that, okay, I think females are doing better than females here. But anyway, this is now subject to other type of interrogation, whereby now you can say, is this subject to the outliers? And when I talk about outliers, again, this is whereby you can find maybe there's one student who is a female and she's scoring higher than the rest. That's why she's now bringing the mean score to go up. And then again, maybe with the males, there's one student who is scoring maybe extremely lower than the rest, whom now he tends to bring the mean to go down. And like I said, those are now some of the things that as an analyst you go further and try and interrogate. Whereby now you say there are two things that can affect your aggregate results. One of them I've said is the denominator, how many elements are there, and then also we have the aspect of outliers, those extreme ends. Maybe somebody is dragging the performance to go up. Okay, so I think those are just ideas that we can get in as far as the analysis are concerned. Now, let's dive into assigning grade. And in this case, I want to get the actual grade for a student. So let me come up with a guiding, more like, I don't know how to call it. There's some sort of guide that you can come up with, whereby I can say, I have a grade. So this is what is going to guide me. Whereby I'll say, if a student average is less than 40, average, what am I doing? So if a student scores less than 40, I'm trying to communicate something, but I think today my brain is a bit lazy. So the idea here is, anyway, so if you score less than 40, then we need to give you a grade of E. I think that's something like that. So if you score less than 40, you are given a grade of E. If you score less than 50, and what this mean is if your average is between 49 and 40, then the software should give you a grade of D. So if you're scoring less than 50, that means you're from 49 up to 40, then you get a grade of D. If you score less than 60, then the software should give you a grade of C. If you score less than 70, then the software should give you a grade of B. Now, of course, if you score something above 70, then automatically that's an A. So there are several ways of going about it. So let me just have it 70 there. So if you're scoring greater than 70, how about you get a grade of A? So we want to put this logic to our system, okay? So that we don't want to be doing this over and over again. So how do we do that? So I'll introduce a function called if, and this time is just if, okay? And the role of if is to basically introduce now what we call condition. And I think that's what I explain as logic, whereby I say with logic there are two outcomes. Either this value is false or the event is true. So the software will basically go and check a student's average and then say, okay, this average is 40. What does the logic say? The logic says if the student is scoring less than 40, gets a grade of E. Okay. Now let's just do it. Okay, let's digest this. Let me use just the concept of either somebody is failing or passing, and then I'll introduce the exact grades that we're having here. So how about we say this? If a student scores less than 40, that student has failed that class. Otherwise, if a student has scored something that is not less than 40, then that student has passed. So how do you put that into Excel? So of course, like I said, we're going to use the function called if. So just say equal sign and then if. And I'm saying it's just if like that, nothing else. So there's this function called if, and it says what? The role of if is to check whether a condition is met. And if that condition is met, the software will return one value if true. So you'll tell what do you want to see when that case is true, and another value if that case is false. So in this case, we're just either getting a student as pass or fail. So if I just click on if, then what is the logic test? What are we testing? I will say I'm testing if the average of a student is less than 40, comma. What should happen if that is true? As we're seeing here, value if true. Now I'll say this student has failed. If that's not the case, so I'll just say comma, value if false, then that student has passed. Now pay attention, because at some time, of course, I can twist this logic test, but now the aspect of value of true and false will also change. So for instance, maybe I say now, I've obtained pass because the student average is 62. If I twist now this logic test and I now use greater than, When I say if the average is greater than 40, value if true will not be fail. The value of true now will be pass. That's what I'm saying. Pay attention with how you understand the logic. Okay, so if somebody twists your logic, does it still make sense in your head? Does I think the idea behind what you're doing here? I think I've already okay. I don't know. I think I don't know if I've made a mistake, but hopefully we'll learn from it because everything you're doing is being recorded. So I hope all these explanations that I'm doing will not always be captured in our macros. But anyway, we're here to learn, so we'll figure out that as we go. So let's now work with the actual grade. And with this actual grade, I will be doing what we call the nested if, because now I'll have to use more than one if conditions. Just observe, and then we go step by step. So I will start with an if, whereby I say if the student average. So the logic test is if the average of that student is less than 40, comma, what should happen? If that is the case, if it's true that student has scored less than 40, then I want the software to assign that student a grade of E. Comma. Now, what if that is not the case? If that student is not in that bracket, then I'll introduce another if statement. And now the logic test this time will be now the second one, whereby I'll say if the average is less than 50. Sorry about that. If the average is less than 50. Now to accommodate the second group, that student was between 40 up to 49. Okay, pay attention again to what I'm saying here, because your logic now will, somebody who's going to get an E in this class is that guy who's going to get 39 going down. If you get 40, umebahatika, so you'll not get an E. Okay, so I think even the student who's going to get an 40 is going to get a grade of D. Now, if the student is not getting a D, again, we'll always be introducing another logic. So value if true, if a student is getting less than 50, I will say, comma, give that student a grade of D. If the student is not getting a D, comma, introduce another if. What is the logic? The logic is if average is less than, this time 60, comma, value is true, what should happen? If it's true that guy is scoring something less than 60, how about we give them a grade of C? Comma, if that's not the case, then introduce another if. Logic test, average is now less than 70, comma, value if true, if it's value if true, what should happen if that guy is scoring less than 70? Then the student gets a grade of B. Now we're at the end, we're almost to the end. So what happens? So there are two ways of solving the last part of this logic test, whereby now you can say, comma, if a student is not accommodated in all these grades, then automatically that student is getting an A. That's one way of going about it. Another one is now again introducing another if, whereby I say if the average, if average is now greater than 70, comma, give that student a grade of A. So I'm really encouraging laziness. So if you don't want to go this road of again introducing greater than, you would have just stopped from here and say, comma, give that student a grade of A, because now he's not accommodated in all those that apply. So it's more or less the same thing. So, but let's just use this one, but maybe at your own free time, because I know you'll be doing this also on your side. Instead of using greater than, just say if that student is not getting a B, comma, just give that student a grade of A. I will press enter. Now the software wants to know, should I trust it to assign those parentheses for me, or I should click, or I want to do it myself? Okay, let me digest this one. So we're saying here, at the end of this formula, you need to put parentheses. So do you want the software to do it for you, or you want to do it on your own? So of course, yes, I want the software to do it for me. So I'll click yes. You can see that now my first student is getting a grade of B. It's a good thing, so it means my formula is working. So the rest is just, I will autofill, and now I have specific grades for all my students. So what next? Let's go to remarks, whereby now in terms of remarks, I'll now say, if a student is scoring less than 40, then that student is going to repeat that class. Otherwise, the student is promoted to the next class. So again, under remarks, I'll just say equal sign if. So if, again, the average is less than 40, what should happen? Comma, so value if true, I want that student to be to repeat that class. But now repeat is a text. So remember we said every time you're writing a text, make sure you enclose it in a speech mark. So I'll say repeat, comma, if a student is not repeating, then value false, then I will say promoted. Perfect. So I will autofill again to have all my results. And as you can see, all my students are promoted. Why? Because all of them are actually getting a grade that is, the average is above 40. Let me maybe adjust some figure. I think there's this one. Let me adjust this guy. No, I think okay, so you can see this student is going to repeat if their average is something less than 40. Now, if this was now the job that you do every term or at the end of every term, then I think that's where we talked about macros. So let's go and stop the macros. So I'll go back to developer, and now I'll say stop recording. I'll stop recording. So this is now what maybe you do every month or after every 3 months, and you don't want to be doing this job over and over again. So what do? Let's work under the assumption that now you have done a different test, but now you want to achieve the same summary report. So I'm going to clear the content of what you have been doing so far, and then we see if we can apply our macros and we get the same results. So I'll also clear content for grading. Our job was also to come up with average, and then I also have, we're doing total marks. So let me adjust some figures. So assuming this time George skips maths class and he really performed poorly in English. So I'm adjusting those figures, and then we see if we're going to get a different result. So I think these are enough. So let's try and see how to implement now that macros that you have just created. So to apply your macros, your job is very simple. So assuming a new data set comes in, or it's a new exam you have given out, as a teacher, your job is just to come to now this part of macros. And as you can see, of course, for me, I've been using macros before, so I have several of them here. But I think we named our macros as end term review. So I'll select that macros, and then I will run. And there you go. You can see I have summary report. This time the average performance for male has really dropped. I have 40, and for female I have 48. In terms of grading, I'm also getting a lot of E's, and in remarks, they're not going to be promoted. So I'm seeing repeat. So the idea here is, I'm sure you have now grasped the knowledge of macros, because that's what we were supposed to do today, whereby I said macros is basically automating your work. If you're doing a repetitive kind of task, you don't have to be doing that job over and over again. You realize maybe this one, just to do this, it has taken me around, I don't know, almost 2 hours. So if I had macros initially in place, I mean, next time I was to do the same job, I was just going to save myself 2 hours of manual work by just implementing the macros. So that is what I was supposed to do today with you. Tomorrow, we will now dive into a different case study, but now I'm really trying to emphasize on now the use of functions. So that now I say, okay, you're now an administrative assistant, or you're now a manager, you want to pay people. How do you sort out your issue using now these formulas that we have been dealing with? So this file, I think you have it. Like I said, yeah, I've shared it in your email. So there's that data entry file. You can play around with it, at least come up with the remarks part, grading, average, and so forth. I wish to stop there. And if there's any question, feel free to ask. Otherwise, it's now your time to go and practice.
Can I just ask? I saw there's average if and average ifs. What is the difference?
Wow. So yeah, there's I think when you say average if, this is where you only have one criteria. But when you use average ifs with an S, it means you have more than one criteria. So assuming maybe you want a male and maybe let me just see so that I don't spread rumors. It says what average ifs finds average, of course, arithmetic mean for cells specified by a given set of conditions. Yeah, I think so. For average ifs, this is where you have more than one condition. I think the same thing we did remember in SPSS we did the male manager. You want a male who's also a manager, something like that. You have more than one condition.
Okay, correct.
Okay. So I think that's it for my end. And then let me stop recording. Hopefully I'll